You're watching The New Stack Makers, a podcast for people who develop, deploy, and manage at-scale software. For more conversations and articles, please visit thenewstack.io. Now on with the show.
Hello and welcome to another episode of The New Stack Makers. I'm Heather Joslin, the features editor of The New Stack. And today we're going to talk about Twitter, Mastodon, Hachyderm, and solving the good problem to have, how to scale super fast to meet user demand. One of the biggest tech stories of 2022, if not the biggest, was the sale of Twitter to Elon Musk for $44 billion with a B dollars, and the subsequent changes to the social media giant, including deep staff cuts and a reported rise in hate speech on the site. Many Twitter members sought an alternative and landed Mastodon, a free and open source platform for running self-hosted social media networks. In this episode, we'll talk to Kris Nóva, principal engineer at GitHub. Hi, Nóva.
Hi.
And Nóva will tell us how and why she created Hachyderm, a fast-growing server on Mastodon aimed at the tech community. And we'll also talk to Gabe Monroy, Chief Product Officer at DigitalOcean. Hi, Gabe.
Hey, Heather. How's it going?
Going pretty well. And Gabe will tell us about the role DigitalOcean played in the story of Hachyderm, including helping it scale. Let's get started. First of all, Nóva, let's set the timeline in our minds. This fall, you were on Twitter. You had a pretty large following, and looks like I looked yesterday preparing for this, and you still have more than 26,000 followers. When did you decide to leave Twitter, and was there a moment when you're thinking, I'm out of here?
I mean, in all honesty, I don't really know how I ended up in Twitter in the situation I did. I think when Gabe and I met in 2015 or so, I was a relatively small Twitter user who was just using it for fun, and somewhere along the way things got out of control and I started to get thousands of followers and people started to take my opinion fairly seriously. I think earlier this year, just in general, I had been having some issues with the platform and just finding a way for me to express myself in a healthy way that seemed to align with the direction Twitter was going. Earlier this year, it was announced that Elon was going to buy Twitter, and I was already having some issues with the platform outside of all of that. And I think I've always been a large advocate for open source software and open source anything in my life, whether it's hosting images for my family or social media or anything. And I always love a good piece of technology to go and explore and try out. And I have a home lab behind me. So I think it was fairly natural for me to try Mastodon. Mm-hmm. I think it took the actual sale to go through and to start seeing some of the impact of what Elon was doing at Twitter before I finally said, I'm out of here. I think that it kind of happened in about two phases. The first one was, hey, everyone, I'll be on Mastodon if you need me, and I'll kind of do both for a while. And I think the moment I started seeing him, reinstating Trump's account and starting to stoke the fire for some of the anti-transgender commentary that I've seen, it was kind of enough for me to just go, all right, enough's enough. Mm-hmm. I'm done contributing and putting my content here on this platform, especially if it's going to just put more money in the hands of a billionaire at this point. And we already had the Mastodon server online, so it was pretty natural for me just to finally say, okay, I'm out of here.
So you moved to Mastodon and created Hachyderm at the same time, or?
So the Hachyderm's interesting. So we started the server in April of this year, and it was just like a small, fun hobby project, right? It ran on the server rack behind me here on the video, if you can see it. And it kind of started off with me and about 20 of my closest friends and family. I do a Twitch stream in the morning, which is where I carve out a small portion of my day to go and prototype and play with new technology. And Mastodon was something that was on my radar. So we've prototyped, 20 or 30 pieces of technology over the past year or so. And this has just happened to be the one that kind of blew up. And so the server started very small, mm-hmm. but it was online. And I think one of my friends turned into two of my friends, turned into 10 of my friends, turned into 20 colleagues. And it just so happens a lot of them were big names in the tech industry. And now all of a sudden I have 30,000 people I have to babysit.
So, wow, so it's grown to 30,000 already. That's amazing.
Yeah, I think our last report was 34,000, I think. It slowed down quite a bit in the past 30 days or so, but there was a time there where we were growing really quick. But we're definitely above 30,000 at this point.
You wrote an O'Reilly book called Cloud Native Infrastructure. So clearly you're you're familiar with scaling. What were the challenges that you encountered as it grew so fast? What are some of the milestones that you hit in terms of making meeting that demand?
Yeah. So on the technology side, I mean, I feel like this is like such a Jurassic Park style answer of like, we had all the problems of a theme park and dinosaurs, but like, we had all the major problems of a normal, like modern day distributed application system or distributed service. And we also had the Twitter migration, right? Like it was just, it kind of all hit at the same time. And so on a technology side, like we ran into, how the Mastodon application is structured and like how does the Ruby code relate to the database and what are the assumptions that it makes. And, Gabe, I'm sure will be able to tell you a lot more about this than I will, but like, his background and my background, like we worked on Kubernetes at Microsoft together. And so we're all about that horizontal distribution life. And here I am operating a Ruby on Rails monolith that's designed to be vertically scaled on a single piece of hardware, and we're trying to break that apart and run that horizontally across the rack behind me. So we got into a lot of trouble very early on with just taking the service itself and starting to decompose it into microservices. Mm-hmm. I think that the one limiting factor we hit from the technology side was our disks. We had some non-enterprise but consumer-grade SSDs in the rack behind me, and we were doing on the order of millions of reads and writes per day, just keeping the Postgres database online, and that was causing cascading failures and cascading outages across our distributed footprint, just because our Postgres service couldn't keep up. So that was definitely the first thing to go. Mm-hmm. I think on the human side, like we now we're moderators. We're full time. We're basically recreating a small instance of Twitter. Everything that Twitter had to do, we have to do. We have to deal with issues and reports, and people have questions and concerns, and there's laws, and there's a lot that goes into it, and we hit those challenges as well at the same time.
When you say we, how many people are having to sort of be de facto moderators? I did want to dig in a little bit to what what that process has been like, because you have this social network and not everyone's going to play nice, even though I got a Mastodon on your server, and it's there are rules right away that you have to agree to. But how do you who's helping you with how many people do you have helping you with the moderation?
Yeah, so we have two teams that kind of keep Hachyderm on live today. One of which is the infrastructure folks, which is I'm kind of the leader of that group, and then my partner Quintessence Ox, she spearheads our moderation effort and our community effort. And so, I mean, this is just like as most like I guess in our case it would be mom and mom, but like mom and pop style social media services you can imagine, right? Like mm-hmm. We're partners. We decided to host this thing and to get involved with it. And, it started out as like me and giving some SSH access to a couple of buddies of mine to like now we have an entire group of folks who are, creating Discord channels and rolling out programs in partnership with, people at DigitalOcean. We've partnered with Tailscale and Honeycomb. And like it feels like we're operating a small startup here, right? Like we have to deal with people and burnout and time management and there's legal concerns and like it's a whole thing.
Gabe, when did you enter the story of Hachyderm, and what were some of the first? It sounds like the disk situation and the bringing this monolith into microservices. Obviously,
well, before that, Heather, I'll just say that I entered the picture because I was a user.
Yeah,
and I was a user, and I was posting on the community, and Nova and I go back, as she mentioned, a long ways. I think we've been working together on and off since 2016, 2017, and from Deus to Microsoft, and we've kept in touch since then. And one of the things I've always really appreciated about her is her ability to sort of lead and pull communities together in lots of different forums. I've seen her do that kind of throughout her career. And so when she stood this Mastodon instance up, I was like, well, hell yeah, I'm along for the ride. So, stood up an account. And so I was posting myself on the server. And so I was actually one of the people who noticed some of the issues, right? And so all of a sudden I'd be on there and I'd be trying to post, and, there would be a 500 error in the apps that I was using. And I was like, oh gosh. And then I started to actually notice in the community, people were complaining, more broadly about, hey, look, there's issues going on. And I was like, oh, I know what this is. This is a success failure in the making here. The scale of this is sort of overwhelming. And so I just kind of like texted Nóva and was like, hey, what's going on? Like, anything I can do to help. And this is, I don't know, in the community, we like to talk about the concept of hug ops, right? This idea of like, hey, when people are having issues on this stuff, like, reach out, try and help, give a hug. And so that was all I did. And Nóva was very crisp and clear and like, this is what I got going on. These are the issues. These are the areas where we could help. And I was like, well, hey, look, I think, Dio could maybe provide some help on the object storage front and offload some of the storage stuff to Spaces. There's probably a lot more we could do, but like, let's focus on putting out the fire. And, once the fire is out, we can figure out if there's any ways we can help beyond that.
So what does the back end look like now? You've got from DigitalOcean. You talked about it a little bit. Just in
I think Nóva and team put out some really great blog posts, and we put out another one on the DigitalOcean blog that goes into some more details on this. But one of the challenges that the team had was, people are uploading photos and media along with the status posts on the site. Like I myself was doing it, and that was hitting these disks that Kris was mentioning here. And I think the issue that we started to see was, hey, is there a way to offload that to something that's going to be a bit more scalable? And DigitalOcean Spaces is an object storage solution that can provide that capability. But that wasn't the interesting part. The interesting part was how the team built it. And there was this really novel Nginx hack with this try files component where the team was able to essentially write data to DigitalOcean Spaces while also sort of moving the data in tandem, like almost having customers help move the data over time, into object storage and really work through the scale motion. And I think it was, from the outside looking in, as I was doing a bit on this, it was just marvelous to see such a talented team of system operators, like using really creative techniques, to put to work on scaling this infrastructure. And so, we wanted to blog a little bit about it. And I think, I was very happy to see some of those techniques share with the broader community.
And we'll also link to some of those blogs in the podcast notes. Is there a particular solution that either of you arrived at that you think you kind of want to brag about? You want to say this was a cool thing that we were able to figure out? And
I would love to give a little bit more clarity on the tri-files situation and talk about the specifics of how DigitalOcean was able to help. And I think also, just like while we're on the topic, like this is the first time I'm kind of hearing like what it's been like from Gabe's experience. And I think this is very indicative to the problem I alluded to earlier, where like a couple of my buddies, casually the CPO of DigitalOcean decides to go and post chicken pictures. And now all of a sudden, like he can't go put his chicken pictures online. And here we are right now. And we're having this like distributed systems conversation.
It was chicken videos. No, so it was even worse than that.
So yeah, Gabe couldn't put his farm videos on Mastodon, and now we've switched over to DigitalOcean object storage. But I think like this is a really good story here. We had spun up a small hobby server, and like all successful projects like this, like we didn't, we got into this thing with the best intentions. Like we weren't expecting, thousands of people to show up. When we set it up, we were like, yeah, we'll carve out a few terabytes of ZFS file storage and, we'll give it to the media share and we'll carve off another terabyte and give it to Postgres and we'll run everything on the same disk. Why not? Like it's a small time hobby shop. And then like it kept growing. And when these things start growing, like it's already too late at that point to really make like any big monumental changes to the underlying infrastructure. And so we had very quickly, like within a matter of 2 weeks, gone from a small hobby server to like we now have a full-fledged production crisis on our hand. I think the thing that kept us moving forward was like the fact that it was the broader tech industry using this thing. I think if this would have been like my mountain climbing community or like Gabe's rancher community, like it probably would have gotten a little less like attention than it did. But like we had some relatively big hitters trying to move over off Twitter, and we knew that we needed to actually get the service to a sustainable point. So the real problem here was that we had the entire service, the whole state for the service was stored on one server, which is behind me in the rack here, and that was running distributed across 8 SSDs. And so when one service, whether it was Postgres or our media share, started to slow down, we would see that cascade into other parts of the Mastodon app. And Mastodon is very prone to cascading failures, and then that would eventually make its way out to the edge where folks would see 500s, or their images would kind of upload or not upload, or they would try to redo it and it would create a duplicate post. There was like a lot of issues we were seeing. And so when you look at the big difference between object storage and block storage, object storage takes like the same primitive and is able to distribute it across multiple machines so that you don't run into these types of problems. Mm-hmm. And that's exactly what Gabe was able to offer for us, which was like, hey, just point your application at this in DigitalOcean and relieve some of the pressure. And that was actually the magic move that was able to give us enough like free space and free CPU cycles on our server to actually finish the rest of our migration out of my basement here and get it into a proper data center where it now lives today. I think what Gabe was talking about with the try files Nginx proxy is a really, really good example of like leveraging modern day technology to solve an interesting problem. And the way that works is you can tell Nginx to look for a file in a priority location and serve it and cache it from there if it exists. Mm-hmm. And if not, proxy that request off to like a different location. And so what we were able to do is we were able to set it up in such a way that anytime somebody looked at a photograph or an image on their Mastodon page, it would come off the server in the rack and it would exist in the cache on what we call our CDN proxies and those were globally distributed around the world. Mm-hmm. And then that would slowly sync itself back to DigitalOcean on the back end and permanently live there. And Nginx would then just be smart enough to be able to try DigitalOcean first moving forward and would never actually look for that image back on the rack where it was. So it took us about 2 weeks after Gabe had texted me and was like, yo, what's going on? I can't upload my chicken videos. And, it took 1.4 terabytes of data to get transferred both to a data center in Germany and to DigitalOcean. And now that's where it lives. And I think it was 3 nights ago, we actually were able to get on the box and check and make sure that everything was finally transferred. And like, it was kind of like one of those Office Space moments where it was like, all right, we're going to actually pull the plug on the server and take the thing offline for the first time since April, since we spun the Mastodon server up. So it was a long process to get here, but I really don't think we would be here today if it wasn't for like our ability to leverage DO and get some of our media files out of the rack as quickly as we did.
Well, and I just have to say I was really impressed with Nóva and team's ability to just like move with speed and purpose. I mean, at the end of the day, DigitalOcean just provides an endpoint to write object storage to. So like the work on our side was fairly small, but Nóva invited a team of engineers and folks from our end into their Discord where they call some of the plays for this stuff. And the team moved really quickly to like test this out in staging and start rolling this out. And obviously that amount of data, terabytes of data it takes a minute to move all that stuff. But it was really cool to see, the team of folks working, with speed on this. And what was interesting too is, a lot of the folks on the DigitalOcean side who were, just sort of advising and helping, the team along just to make sure everything was smooth. They were also members of the Hachyderm community too, right? So everyone kind of had this vested interest in seeing, they don't all have chicken videos like me, right? So I was extra eager for this, but because I think Nóva mentioned this before, like this Hachyderm community has turned out to be a pretty important community so far, and I think for me, it's been really fascinating to see the quality of individuals and discourse, and I don't know, it feels very different than Twitter feels, and I like to think of it almost like, remember back in the early days of Facebook when Facebook was like just your actual family and friends, and the feed was like just the stuff that you care about, and you could really connect from a social media perspective, and it brought value and like joy to your life. That's what Hachyderm feels like to me. Right. And Twitter just does not.
Nova's very happy.
Well, and I think I know that's what she's going for and what the community is going for, but I think everyone who's involved in the community feels that, to a degree. And so we were all bummed when the scaling was an issue, myself included. And I'm just thrilled to see the team, coming out on the other side.
Has the rate of people joining Hachyderm slowed down, plateaued, kept going faster? Or is it where do you stand now with that?
Great question, Heather. So we have graphs, and we're definitely in love with our ability to build some like open source observability tools here. So right now, if you go to grafana.hachyderm.io/public, you can see there's active graphs, and anytime somebody joins the service, you can see like the service count go up, and you can see however many statuses we have. But to answer the question, we have absolutely slowed down. So there was, throughout the course of like the end of October, throughout most of November, that's when we got, the bulk of our new users to Hachyderm. And there was one day in particular where I think we got like 1,400 new users in a single day. Wow. And so, today, like we're seeing like maybe 1,000 join like every couple of days or so. And like, we'll watch it go from 33 to 34,000, and kind of like those are like small milestones within their own right. But I mean, that first month and like the early weeks of November, it was just like I would like go to bed and there'd be 19,000, and I'd wake up and there'd be 24. Wow. And it was just kind of like, oh, this is a lot. But yeah, so we've seen it slow down. I think that like we want to continue to like allow folks to join, and we're trying really hard to keep that like small business community vibe sense of social media alive. I think that like one of the things we learned with Twitter, just observing it and being a Twitter user, is that like when you get to the point where it turns into a product and it turns into like a revenue seeking corporate product, then like there's going to be some trade-offs there, and there's not necessarily anything wrong with that. Although I think in the name of Twitter, like it became very obvious very quickly that Twitter was a vehicle for money, and I think that came at the expense of users like myself. And Hachyderm is like, the whole goal of it, as far as I'm concerned, is to keep it as sustainable as possible, so that we're not having to like offset the operating costs with ads or marketing or product marketing. We can just try to keep it as kind of like neutral and frankly boring as possible, right? The NPR of social media, if you could imagine such a thing.
The NPR, so that's a good tagline. Yeah, I did have a question. We were talking about the servers and the data center in Germany and all that. Like, how are you able to cover operating costs at this point?
So right now, I'm able to just kind of like eat the cost myself. I operate a Twitch stream, and we're taking the proceeds of that and putting it towards operating the service. That was kind of the model originally. I think that, the home lab behind me is something that I was able to just pay for and just continue to operate on. And now that it's actually a service, we're having to figure out ways of like supporting it and funding it and being transparent. So I haven't actually made an announcement yet, but I'm more than happy to like share with both of you why we're here. The work that we have done with DigitalOcean and the other corporations that we've been partnering with have inspired us to form a 501c3. And so we're going to be announcing a nonprofit in January. Yay, exciting.
That's great.
And the hope for that is so that we can begin to look at funding models and figuring out a way to offset the cost and track the budget and the cost of this thing in a transparent way and kind of give it back to the community.
That's great. What do you anticipate having to make any changes in the coming months to the tech stack as continue to get more users? And if it continues, you said it has slowed down, but obviously once this podcast is out with our vast global audience,
sure.
Yeah, but and additional attention from other media. I mean, it may continue to grow. It will continue to grow. Do you feel you've got a system for scaling it now in place? Or
we have the initial fire put out, so like all chicken videos are good to go for the foreseeable future. However, like we still have a backlog, right? Like there's things we need to do. And I think that like priority in my mind right now is get the 501c3 formed and start to identify our revenue streams and our budget for the year. I think that we're going to be entertaining the idea of doing some sort of like open science-based experimentation where we can like bring on different products and prototype them at scale and actually bring folks on and use it as sort of a vehicle for documenting some of the raw computer science behind some of the products folks are interested in trying out. And our hope is that we can figure out a way that's kind of beneficial to everyone without being invasive to our community, that allows us to like try out new observability techniques or distributed scaling techniques or cloud offerings, et cetera, et cetera. So I think that's going to kind of cover the budget. As far as the technology goes, we want to get to a point where we can bring in marginalized people, young folks to the industry, folks who are interested in making a career pivot, folks who are interested in learning more about how to operate a large distributed global system, and bring them in and help them contribute to our day-to-day operations, right? If somebody was looking for experience to sit in the driver's seat and like, what does it look like to wear a pager for one of these like large multi-thousand user, large distributed systems, how do I get involved? And this gives us an opportunity to kind of do that in a safe way with like low risk to your average newcomer to the technical industry. So I think I would suspect, anywhere there's open source services that people seem to enjoy, there's innovation. We're going to see, this is just my speculation, but I suspect we're going to see all kinds of like open source projects and new ways of communicating with people. And, the folks have been throwing around a lot of the original Facebook features. How do we schedule events and how do we document communities and like what about marketplace? There's probably going to be a lot of that we'll see in the Fediverse in the coming year. I just hope that Hachyderm is going to be able to support that and build to it. Very specifically, as far as our stack is concerned, we're probably going to get another 4 or 5 large servers in Germany and some here in the States for legal purposes, so we can have data residency checked off. And other than that, we'll probably try to keep it as boring as possible.
One more question. What do you think the Twitter story tells us about the role social media plays or should play in our lives?
This is an opinion question. Gabe, do you want to go first?
Yeah, yeah, this is for both of you.
I think Twitter has been an important part of the tech scene for a long time. And I think, to me personally, it's sad. It's just sad to see the direction it's taken. But like with all things that, are sad and maybe come to, some amount of an end in terms of expectations, that creates opportunity, right? And what I've seen with the Hachyderm community has been, it has surprised me in a positive way in terms of how impactful it can be in such a short amount of time. And my real hope going forward here is that folks of all stripes can chip in, because at the end of the day, this is a community. And if people don't pitch in some way, whether that's money or infrastructure or cycles or whatever that is, it falls on the backs of the handful of people who volunteer their time, to put towards the community, and that is not, to Nova's point before around sustainability, that's not sustainable. And so I'm really looking to see, like, can we showcase what community can do almost as a counterpoint, to what centralized social media can do. I'm really interested to see if we can prove that out in the Fediverse, and sign me up for that.
Heck yeah. I couldn't have said it better myself. I'm here for it. I think I've learned a lot about the relationship of like corporations and product marketing to things like social media through Twitter. But like Gabe said, I mean, I wouldn't be here if it wasn't for Twitter, right? Twitter bought this house, right? Like my career wouldn't be where it is. I wouldn't be where I am. My book wouldn't be published. Like there's a lot that like Twitter was there and a part of my personal journey. So it's kind of like Gabe said, it's sad, right? I feel like I'm losing a small part of like what made me me. There's definitely a chunk of my identity on twitter.com/Kris Nóva. And like, it's nice to be able to reinvent myself and to kind of like cross off some of those bad habits that I used to be in with Twitter. But at the same time, I think that it is a shift, and it's not going to be a one-to-one with Twitter. There's going to be things that we're going to have to find new homes for, and there's going to be new opportunities and some things that are going to be different now. I think as far as the community is concerned, I'm excited, and I deeply believe that we have a path forward where we can have an open source and collaborative social media footprint on the planet, frankly, where folks can come together and contribute in the name of science and altruism to just contribute to a service that we all love and that we all enjoy and lifts us all up and raises, what's the expression? The rising tide raises all ships. I definitely see a lot of that here with Hachyderm. And we're trying to figure out like what is the balance, right? Is it do we bring corporations on? Do we let folks contribute? Do we not? And I think there's a lot of unanswered questions at this point. To be candid, I would just love to see more of the type of things that we're seeing from Gabe and DigitalOcean about how they can just come, no strings attached. Here's how we can help out, and we're just here to help lift up the community any way we can. And that's been super helpful and super exciting to watch.
Excellent. Well. Thank you very much for your time, Nova and Gabe. I really appreciate it. And thank you for sharing this story. And And I want to thank all of you for listening in. I'm Heather Joslin for the New Stack Makers, and we'll see you next time.
If you like this video, please give us a thumbs up. And if you'd like to see more videos like this, you can always subscribe to our YouTube channel. We're on all the major social media platforms. You can always find us at thenewstack.io. We hope to see you soon.